And good morning, everyone. This is Linda with Linda Sue Plants for You. I want to welcome everybody back and let you all know that I'm doing well. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the care of my Pilea, Peperomioides. I've had a number of questions on this plant, and so I thought I would just do a video so that everyone can get their questions answered at the same time. But this plant originally was in a 1 or 2 inch pot, 1.5 inch maybe, and I got it 2 years ago, I believe it is now. It was back when those plants were extremely expensive, but I got lucky and I found one for, I think it was $12 or $14 at Stein's Gardens and Gifts, and I grew her up from there. One of the things that happens with this plant that people get scared over is the leaves will pucker up. Let's see if I can get a close-up of one of those for you. Okay, there's one. That's perfectly normal. That happens for a variety of reasons. It can happen because it's too much water, not enough water, but usually it is a watering issue. So another thing that will happen is the leaves will, as you can see how they're kind of hanging down here, the leaves will droop. But I want to caution you, do not water it if it's damp, because these leaves sometimes, when they get watered, they get a little heavy and they will hang down like that. So it's not necessarily indicative of needing water at that moment. So make sure that you check the soil. And I had to repot this. It was in a shorter 8 or 10 inch pot, I forget. I think it was an 8 inch, but I repotted it into a 12 inch, as you can see, or I'm sorry, 14 inch, and but it's much deeper than the one it came out of. So I have to be extra careful now when I water that I'm not over watering. We don't want all that soil down underneath to stay wet. So I water, I want to say sparingly, but I don't want to be misunderstood here. I water enough so that I know from experience when I'm putting that water in, if it's getting down to the bottom of the roots where it needs to get. And I think that just comes with experience. So for those of you that are, just learning about plants and how to take care of them, that's going to be a hard one for me to answer, other than to tell you, if you're having watering issues, the best thing you can do is use a smaller pot. Better to be underpotted than overpotted. And the reason is that soil, if there's not something to drink that water out of that soil, it's going to stay wet. Now, terracotta is a good option for this plant because it will dry out, because terracotta breathes, where you won't have that option with plastic or painted ceramic. So that's one of the reasons I like terracotta, and that's not necessarily a good option for all plants. I have other plants that do much better in plastic, so that's just for this plant that we're talking about now. The other thing is, as I started to say, if that soil stays wet, it's going to rot the roots of your plant. So when you water, make sure that soil is drying out pretty good before you add more water, okay? And there's a fine line with this plant between letting it dry out and letting it dry out too far. You really have to keep a close eye on this plant to keep her healthy and looking good. Now, one of the other things that I do almost daily is I turn my plant a little bit each day. And the reason is, if you don't, it's all gonna lean to one side. Well, depending on the light. But as you can see, I've got quite a lot of twisting going on in there. And that's because I let it go for a couple days. For whatever reason, I wasn't able to get it turned. And it will go toward the light. So if it's leaning towards you, that's what you want. If it's leaning towards you, then put it in the window that way so that it leans towards the light. If it's leaning toward the light, toward the window, too far past center, it's probably needs to be moved. I've only had one occasion where I had I had 2 leaves, I think, last year that got sunburned. And that was during the winter months because, and I'm not sure if you can see this, I'll try to get a closer look. I have trees out here, and although they're not real full, it still provides baffled light in the summer. In the wintertime, there's no leaves on those trees, so my sun is actually much brighter in this south window in the winter than it is in the summer, which is pretty much the opposite of most people. So when I say it's in a south window, yes it is, but keep that in mind. And again, it needs a very, very bright light. As bright as you can get it. I've got 2 other babies from her, started in separate pots, and she is about 5 inches from the glass. And she would be even doing better if she were closer. But she's pretty full. She's doing okay, so I'm not worried about it. And then moving over here, this one is about maybe 10-12 inches from the window, but I've got a grow light, an LED light over her, so she's getting lots of light. And my original plant, the mama, this one, started out where that last one I just showed you was. It was on that table, kind of about 10 inches from the window, under the LED light. And she did fine, but then she got too big for that space, so I had to move her. And I've been moving her a lot ever since because when it comes to lighting, these plants are really challenging, to say the least. So that's one thing that you have to really, really, really pay attention to. And as far as feeding, I feed her like my other plants when I think of it. I used to be... when I used just the synthetic, the Peters, it's now called Jack's, fertilizer, I used that for many, many years. It's just these blue crystals that you dissolve in water, and I used to use that every time I watered. And that's okay too, if that's what you want to do, but you got to make sure that you dilute it by a lot. So if it calls for a teaspoon, I would use maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon. 1/8 to 1/4. And that's depending on what plants I'm going to feed. Not all plants like a lot of food. Some are big feeders and some are not. This one is kind of middle of the road. It likes to get a shot of food once in a while, but even more than that, I give this plant Epsom salt every now and then. About every few months, maybe every... I don't have a schedule, but I'm going to say if I had to make a guesstimate, every 4 to 5 months, every 3 to 5 months, I take a gallon of water with a tablespoon of Epsom salt and dissolve. I put a little water, hot water in the bottom of the gallon jug, put the Epsom salt in there, shake it up really good, and dissolve it, and then I add the rest of the water. I have used both tap water and distilled water on this plant. It does do much better with the distilled. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you have this plant and you're struggling with it, you might want to try the distilled water. But keep in mind that the distilled water doesn't have, it's got, everything's been taken out of it. There's no minerals, there's no vitamins, there's no benefit that the plant will get from that. So if that's what you're using, then you definitely need to give her plant food. So there is no set rule on this plant. As with most plants, everyone's home is different, everybody's lighting is different, and as I've said many, many times in the past, you know, my south window is not going to be equal to your south window. My east window light is not going to be equal to your east window light. A lot depends on where you are in the hemisphere. A lot depends on, you know, what time does the sun come up in your east window? What time of year is it? Does it come up at 6 a.m. or does it come up at 5 a.m.? And, you know, how much light is your plant actually getting? That's important. The other thing is, I have not yet washed the leaves on this plant. I do spray them. I haven't done that in a while, and she still looks pretty good, so I'm not too worried about it. For some reason, she doesn't collect dust like some of my other plants, and I'm very grateful for that because it would be difficult to do. And then lastly, the babies are going to come up anywhere in the bottom of the pot. They could come up from the crown of the plant. Let me see if I can get in there and show you. I don't think you're going to be able to see this very well, but they can come up from the crown of the plant, you know, where the stem meets the soil, or it can go across the bottom, of the soil, and end up popping up right by the rim. Now this one is actually in a ways, but I've had some that come up here. Right here there's one. I mean, it's touching the rim. And if the pot was bigger, it probably would have kept going. So that tells me that these plants must be some type of ground cover in its native habitat because of the way it grows. And I could be wrong on that, but it's just my guess. So when you repot this, keep that in mind, that, you know, the new growth is not going to necessarily come from the original plant, okay? So it needs room to expand. But again, you don't want to overpot this because then you're going to have the watering issue. You're going to water the plant and the soil. If there's too much soil in the pot, it's going to stay wet and you're going to rot the roots. Other than that, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. That I hope I didn't miss anything, but I can tell you this plant has brought me so much joy and pleasure, and I like her because she's so unique looking. And really, once you get the care down pat, it's not that she's not that hard to take care of. It's just the initial finding that sweet spot. And you might have to move her a few times before you do. So be open to that. But then once you do, just leave her there because every time you move a plant, they've got to readjust. So now one of the things that I did just do with her, I had her over in this corner and I had to move her because of some other plants. And so I moved her to this side, and I watched during the day as the sun came through the window. And believe it or not, she got more light being a foot away from where she was than she did here. And I guess that's just the way the sun is coming around the building and behind the tree, and I'm not quite sure how to explain that, but when I see the light shining on her now, it'll be probably about 2 hours, in about 2 hours or so, that light's going to be directly coming through that window. It's going to be directly on her. And then she's going to be shielded a little bit by my burro's tail, which is behind. But the sun is high enough yet that it's gonna come over. Some of it's gonna come over that and hit the tops of these leaves. Then as the sun moves to the west, it will come through these two windows. So she's getting light now, all day from one spot or the other. And again, it's direct sunlight. So okay. As far as humidity goes, I don't worry much about humidity on most of my plants. I do have a hygrometer that I keep in the living room here that I do pay attention to. If it starts to get too humid in here, I will turn on the air or the heat or open the door or whatever I have to do to get it down, because we live in a very low-lying area, and our area is very humid even when it's not humid on the news, which is very weird. But that's because we're surrounded by a lot of water. We have a lot of lakes around us, and creeks and rivers and streams, and so yeah, we've got a lot of humidity. So I try to keep the humidity around 55, 60 at the most, but I've had days here where my humidity is like through the roof. So in that case, I have to do something about it so it doesn't get out of hand and, you know, cause other issues. So oh, and one more thing. This plant will shed its leaves, so don't get too worried about it. You're going to have natural attrition with this plant. It just does it. I don't know why. I've researched it to death, and everything that I come across tells me that it's the natural progression of the plant. So, unfortunately, you will lose some leaves, but it has so much, and it keeps producing more babies, and as long as you don't dig those out, they will grow up and they will fill in those bare spots. So I think that's about it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in a comment section. I am in the process of setting up a separate email for my YouTube account so that people are able to converse with me a little easier. I haven't gotten that completed yet, but once I do, I will let you all know, and you guys can go there, and if you have any, I know it's hard to do that on the, it's hard to talk to each other on the comment section, so we're gonna do that pretty soon here. Okay, well, I think that's gonna be it. I'm excited to bring you another video, and I pray that it continues, and I continue to feel healthy enough to do so, and I'm excited for fall. I never was much for the hot, humid weather, and so that helps too, when I can open my doors and windows and have that kind of coolish breeze blowing in. That really, it gives me a lot of oomph, for lack of a better term. But all right, and I guess I'll give you one quick peek at these other plants here, because they're doing pretty good. I've got my lipstick plant, and I had a whole bunch of blooms on here about a week ago, but they're gone now. I took her in the kitchen and sprayed her down really good and gave her a good watering. Oh, here's some blooms that are about to start out. You can see that. So she's doing very well. And those of you that follow me know that I thought I lost her because she went so long without water. But she's hanging in there, folks, so toes crossed. And this is my goldfish, and she's got a whole bunch of blooms. She's got some there, and I think there's one up in here, and some behind there. She's doing very good. few that are starting to dry up, but she loves this window too. I'd love to see this whole plant covered in blooms, and I think if I could give her the perfect conditions, I could do that, but unfortunately we live in the real world, in a real house, and my house is not a greenhouse, so I don't know if that'll ever happen, but at least she honors me with a few of her beautiful goldfish flowers, so I'm happy about that. All right, well, that's it for today. I will be back soon with some more hopefully interesting videos for you. And if you haven't yet seen my video on my Raid Ant and Roach Killer, and you want a good laugh, go ahead and click on my, go ahead and subscribe, and then look at my last video from yesterday. I think you'll get a kick out of it. Okay, until then, you all have a good day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.